Commander Zix-9 stood before the massive viewing screen in the High Council chamber of Kethmoran. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the floating platforms that held the 12 council members. Each member wore the traditional silver robes that marked their high rank in the galactic government. Their faces showed the calm confidence of beings who had ruled the galaxy for over 10,000 years. The largest council member, High Chancellor Vexuthara, spoke first. Her voice carried the weight of authority that came from centuries of leadership. Commander Zix-9, you have served the Observation Corps for 300 years. Your record shows 17 successful mission reports on various species across the galaxy. Today we have a new assignment for you. Zix-9 bowed his head respectfully. His three eyes focused on the Chancellor, while his other senses remained alert for any changes in the room. After so many years of service, he had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated the importance of a mission. The tension in the air today felt different from his previous assignments. The species known as humans have entered into conflict with the Draknari Empire, Chancellor Vexuthara continued. Our intelligence reports suggest that the Draknari fleet will easily destroy the human forces within days, possibly hours. However, we require detailed observations of human military capabilities before we decide whether to intervene or allow the Draknari to expand into human territory. Another council member, Lord Kethmore, leaned forward on his floating platform. His ancient face showed the wrinkles of someone who had seen empires rise and fall. These humans are a young species, Commander. They have barely mastered space travel, and their weapons are primitive compared to established galactic powers. We expect this conflict to be brief and one-sided. Zix-9 accessed his mental database about humans. The information was limited, but painted a picture of a species that had only recently left their home world. They used chemical rockets and nuclear weapons, technology that most galactic civilizations had abandoned thousands of years ago. Their ships were slow and their defensive systems were basic at best. What specific data do you require, High Chancellor? Zix-9 asked. His training had taught him to ask for clear objectives before beginning any observation mission. Too many observers had failed because they did not understand exactly what their superiors wanted to learn. We need tactical assessments of their combat effectiveness, their command structure, and their response to overwhelming force, the Chancellor replied. The Draknari have requested permission to expand through human space after they complete their conquest. We must determine if humans pose any future threat to galactic stability, or if they can be safely ignored. The council chamber's main screen activated, showing a star map of human territory. The area was small compared to the vast empires that dominated the galaxy. Red markers indicated Draknari fleet positions, while blue markers showed human settlements and military bases. The disparity in numbers was obvious even to Zix-9's trained eye. The conflict will take place in the Kepler 442 system, Lord Kethmore explained. The humans have established a colony world there called New Haven. Intelligence reports indicate they will make their primary defense at this location rather than abandoning the colony. Zix-9 studied the tactical display with interest. Most species would evacuate non-essential personnel and fall back to more defensible positions when faced with superior numbers. The human decision to stand and fight at their colony suggested either remarkable courage or complete foolishness. His experience suggested it was probably the latter. Your observation post will be cloaked and positioned at a safe distance, the Chancellor continued. Under no circumstances are you to interfere with the battle or make contact with either side. Your role is purely observational. We need accurate data, not heroic interventions. The commander nodded his understanding. He had followed the same protocols on 16 previous missions. The Galactic Council's policy of non-interference had served them well for millennia. They observed, they learned, and they made decisions based on facts rather than emotions. How long do you estimate the mission will last? Zix-9 asked. Planning his equipment and supplies required accurate time estimates. Some of his previous missions had lasted months, while others were completed in days. Our military analysts predict the human resistance will collapse within 6 to 12 hours after the Draknari arrival, Lord Kethmore answered. Plan for a 3-day mission to allow for post-battle observations and data collection. Zix-9 felt a familiar sense of detachment settling over his mind. This was just another assignment, another species to catalog and study. He had watched the rise and fall of 17 different civilizations during his career. Some had impressed him with their ingenuity, others had disappointed him with their weakness. All had eventually taken their place in the vast historical records of the Galactic Council. "You will depart immediately," Chancellor Vexthera declared. "Your ship and equipment are being prepared now. The Draknari fleet is already moving toward human space, so time is essential." As Zix-9 left the council chamber, he reviewed what he knew about both species involved in the coming conflict. The Draknari were experienced warriors with advanced technology and proven tactics. They had conquered dozens of worlds and had never faced serious resistance from primitive species. Their victory over the humans seemed certain. The humans, by contrast, were newcomers to galactic warfare. They had fought wars among themselves on their homeworld, but had never faced an alien enemy. Their technology was outdated, their numbers were small, and their experience was limited. Everything in Zix-9's training told him this would be a quick and predictable outcome. 2 hours later, Zix-9 sat in the command chair of his observation vessel as it moved through hyperspace toward the Kepler 442 system. His ship's computers were already analyzing available data about human military organization. The reports painted a picture of a species that relied more on determination than sophisticated strategy. He began preparing his initial report templates, expecting to document another routine extinction event. After 3 centuries of service, Zix-9 believed he had seen everything the galaxy could offer. The upcoming battle would be just another entry in his long career of observations. The journey to human space would take 18 hours. Zix-9 used the time to review tactical databases and prepare his recording equipment. Soon he would witness the final chapter of human civilization, and the Galactic Council would have the data they needed to make their decision about the Draknari expansion. Everything seemed routine and predictable, exactly like the 16 missions that had come before. Zix-9 arrived at the edge of the Kepler 442 system, just as the Draknari fleet dropped out of hyperspace. His cloaked observation ship took position behind a large asteroid, giving him a perfect view of the developing battle. The tactical display showed the overwhelming advantage that the Draknari possessed in both numbers and firepower. The Draknari fleet was impressive by any standard. 12 massive dreadnoughts led the formation, each one over 2 kilometers long and bristling with energy weapons. Behind them came 30 battlecruisers and countless smaller support vessels. The fleet moved with the precision of experienced warriors who had conquered many worlds before this one. Admiral Kathek commanded the Draknari forces from his flagship, a vessel called the Death's Edge. Zix-9 had studied Draknari military records and knew that Kathek had never lost a battle. The admiral was known for his efficient tactics and his complete lack of mercy toward defeated enemies. Today would likely add another easy victory to his already impressive record. The human fleet defending New Haven looked pathetic in comparison. Zix-9 counted only 18 ships total, and most of them appeared to be converted civilian vessels. Former mining ships had been fitted with weapons that seemed too large for their frames. Old cargo haulers had been given armor plating that looked like it might fall off during the first exchange of fire. Captain Jake Morrison commanded the human forces from a ship called the Liberty Bell. The vessel had once been a passenger liner that carried colonists to distant worlds. Now it served as the flagship for what looked like the most desperate defense force Zix-9 had ever observed. The ship's hull was scarred from previous battles, and patches of different colored metal showed where repairs had been made with whatever materials were available. Zix-9 began recording as the two fleets moved toward each other. His tactical computer calculated the odds of human survival at exactly 0.003%. The analysis showed that the Draknari possessed more than 10 times the firepower of the entire human fleet. Under normal circumstances, the humans should surrender immediately to avoid unnecessary loss of life. But something unexpected happened. Instead of trying to negotiate or retreat, Captain Morrison opened a communication channel to his entire fleet. His voice came across all frequencies, clear and steady despite the impossible odds he faced. "All ships, this is Captain Morrison," he said. I know what you're thinking when you look at those Draknari ships. I know some of you are scared, and that's okay. I'm scared too. But I want you to remember something important. Behind us is New Haven, and on that world are 3 million people who are counting on us to keep them safe. Zix-9 found himself listening intently to the human captain's words. In all his years of observation, he had rarely heard commanders address fear so directly. Most species either ignored fear completely or tried to eliminate it through discipline and training. We are not professional soldiers, Morrison continued. Most of us were miners, traders, and colonists just a few months ago, but today we stand between our families and an enemy that wants to destroy everything we've built. That makes us something more than soldiers. That makes us guardians. The human fleet began to move forward, directly toward the much larger Draknari formation. Zix-9 checked his instruments twice, certain there must be some mistake. Standard military doctrine called for weaker forces to use defensive positions and try to draw stronger enemies into traps. The humans were doing the exact opposite. Admiral Cathek seemed equally surprised by the human tactics. His fleet slowed as he tried to understand what the humans were planning. Perhaps he suspected some kind of trick or hidden weapon that would explain their bold advance. Remember what we're fighting for, Morrison broadcast again. Every soul on New Haven is counting on us. Make them proud. The first exchange of fire began when the fleets were still at extreme range. Draknari energy. Beams reached out across space, striking the lead human ships with devastating effect. One of the converted mining vessels exploded immediately, its reactor unable to handle the massive energy discharge. But instead of falling back, the human ships accelerated forward. Lieutenant Amy Carter, piloting a small fighter called Luna's Dream, led a group of similar craft directly into the heart of the Draknari formation. Her ship was barely the size of a Draknari shuttle, but she flew it with skill that impressed even Zix-9's trained eye. Carter's fighter took heavy fire as it approached the nearest Draknari dreadnought. Her ship's shields failed quickly under the intense bombardment, and damage indicators showed that her engines were failing. Any reasonable pilot would have retreated at this point to preserve their life for a more strategic moment. Instead, Carter accelerated even faster toward her target. Her voice came across the communication channels calm despite the chaos around her. Luna's Dream to all fighters. I'm making a run at their shield generator. Follow me in when I breach their defenses. Zix-9 watched in fascination as the tiny human fighter approached the massive Draknari ship. The size difference was so extreme that it looked like an insect attacking a giant. Carter's weapons were too small to cause serious damage to the dreadnoughts. Heavy armor, but she kept firing anyway. Then something happened that made Zix-9 lean forward in his observation chair. Carter's fighter was critically damaged, her engines were failing, and her weapons were nearly depleted. But instead of trying to escape, she pointed her ship directly at the Draknari vessel's shield generator array and activated her remaining engine power. The collision should have been meaningless. One small fighter against a massive dreadnought was like throwing a stone at a mountain. But Carter had aimed precisely at the most vulnerable part of the enemy ship's defenses. Her fighter struck the shield generator and exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The explosion was small compared to the size of the Draknari ship, but the effects were immediate. The dreadnought's protective shields flickered and failed along its entire port side. Suddenly, the massive vessel was vulnerable to attack from smaller weapons. The other human fighters followed Carter's example without hesitation. They dove toward the now vulnerable dreadnought, their small weapons finally able to penetrate the enemy's armor. What had seemed like a hopeless gesture moments before became a coordinated attack that actually damaged one of the most powerful ships in the galaxy. Zix-9's tactical computer struggled to process what he was witnessing. The humans had just achieved something that should have been impossible. They had damaged a Draknari dreadnought using nothing but small fighters and individual acts of sacrifice. The mathematics didn't make sense, but the results were undeniable. Admiral Cathek responded quickly to the unexpected threat. His fleet adjusted formation and concentrated fire on the remaining human fighters. The small craft were destroyed rapidly under the focused bombardment, but they had already proven that the supposedly invincible Draknari ships could be hurt. Captain Morrison's voice came across the communication channels again, and this time there was something different in his tone. All ships, you saw what Amy and her people just accomplished. They showed us that these Draknari can be beaten. Now let's show them what happens when you threaten our home. The human fleet charged forward with renewed determination. Ships that should have been retreating instead accelerated toward their much larger enemies. Zix-9 realized he was witnessing something his 3 centuries of experience had never prepared him for. These humans were transforming certain death into something that looked almost like hope. The battle intensified as more human ships reached the Draknari formation. What Zix-9 witnessed next defied every principle of military science he had learned during his long career. The humans fought with a style that seemed to ignore basic concepts like self-preservation and tactical withdrawal. Sergeant Pete Collins commanded a converted cargo transport called the Heavy Lifter. His ship had been fitted with thick armor plating and carried a boarding party of human marines. When the Draknari tried to board a damaged human vessel, Collins ordered his ship to ram the enemy boarding craft. The collision damaged both ships severely, but Collins wasn't finished. His transport was breached in multiple locations and the hull was failing rapidly. Instead of ordering an evacuation, he sealed himself and his remaining crew members in the compromised section of the ship. "This is Collins to all ships," he broadcast, calmly. "My reactor is going critical and I can't stop it. I'm going to take some of these aliens with me. Tell my wife I love her." Zix-9 watched in amazement as Collins manually overrode his ship's safety systems and caused the reactor to overload. The explosion was massive, destroying not only his own transport, but also the Draknari boarding craft, and seriously damaging 2 enemy cruisers. One human ship had just eliminated 3 enemy vessels through pure sacrifice. The tactical computer in Zix-9's brain tried to categorize what he was seeing, but there were no existing classifications for this type of warfare. The humans were using their own lives as weapons, and somehow it was working. Each act of sacrifice seemed to inspire the other human ships to fight even harder. Captain Lisa Rodriguez commanded a retrofitted mining ship called the Iron Will. Her vessel carried the largest weapons in the human fleet, mining lasers that had been modified for combat use. When her primary target moved out of range, she didn't retreat to find a better position. Instead, she ordered her ship to pursue the enemy at maximum speed. The Iron Will chased a Draknari battlecruiser through a complex series of maneuvers. Rodriguez's ship was slower and less maneuverable than her target, but she refused to give up the pursuit. Her crew worked frantically to repair damage while maintaining the chase. "Engineering, I need more power to the engines," Rodriguez called out over the ship's communication system. "I don't care if you have to shut down life support. We're going to catch that cruiser." Zix-9 observed the human ship pushing its systems far beyond safe limits. The Iron Will's hull glowed from the heat of its overworked engines, and pieces of damaged equipment were being ejected into space. Any reasonable commander would have broken off the attack to prevent total system failure. Rodriguez finally caught up to her target when the Draknari cruiser slowed to avoid an asteroid field. The Iron Will's modified mining laser cut through the enemy ship's armor like a blade through paper. The Draknari vessel exploded in a brilliant fireball that lit up the asteroid field. But Rodriguez's victory came at a cost. Her ship's engines failed completely after the extended chase, and her weapons were burned out from overuse. The Iron Will drifted helplessly in space, unable to maneuver or fight. When 2 more Draknari ships moved to attack the disabled vessel, Rodriguez made another impossible decision. "All hands, abandon ship," she ordered. "I'm going to ram the lead cruiser. Get to the escape pods now." Zix-9 watched Rodriguez manually steer her dying ship toward the approaching enemy vessels. The Iron Will had no power for engines, but it still had enough momentum to serve as a massive projectile. The collision with the Draknari cruiser destroyed both ships instantly. Admiral Kathek was beginning to show signs of concern as he watched his supposedly easy victory turn into a costly battle. His fleet still had overwhelming advantages in numbers and firepower, but the humans were making every victory expensive. The Draknari had already lost more ships in this engagement than in their previous 3 conquests combined. Commander Danny Wright found himself in command of the human destroyer Falcon's Edge. when his captain was killed by enemy fire. Wright was only 19 years old and had been serving as a communications officer until moments before. His voice shook as he gave his first orders as a ship commander. "This is Wright taking command of the Falcon's Edge," he announced. "We've lost Captain Barnes, but we're still in this fight. All stations report status immediately." The young commander's ship was badly damaged and outnumbered by approaching enemy vessels. Standard procedure would have been to retreat and try to link up with other human ships for mutual support. Wright chose a different path. "We're going to hit their command ship," he declared. "If we can damage Kathek's flagship, it might disrupt their coordination long enough for our other ships to gain an advantage." The Falcon's Edge accelerated toward the massive Draknari flagship Death's Edge. Wright's ship was tiny compared to the enemy dreadnought, but the young commander flew directly at his target without hesitation. His weapons were almost depleted, and his shields were failing, but he never wavered in his approach. "For Earth," Wright whispered as his ship approached the enemy flagship. The words were barely audible over the ship's communication system, but Zix-9's sensitive recording equipment captured them clearly. Wright's attack run succeeded in damaging the Death's Edge, but his ship was destroyed in the process. The young commander's sacrifice created a gap in the Draknari formation that other human ships immediately exploited. Zix-9 found himself gripping the arms of his observation chair as he watched the battle unfold. His 3 hearts were beating in a rhythm he had never experienced before. The humans were losing ships and crew members with every exchange, but their remaining vessels seemed to fight with increasing determination. The tide of battle began to shift when Captain Morrison led the final assault on Admiral Kathek's damaged flagship. The Liberty Bell was the largest ship in the human fleet, but it was still dwarfed by the Draknari dreadnought. Morrison's vessel had taken heavy damage and was barely functioning. "All remaining ships form up on the Liberty Bell," Morrison broadcast. "We're going to finish this right now. Every ship that can still fight, follow me to the Death's Edge." The surviving human vessels gathered around their flagship like a pack of wounded predators preparing for one last attack. There were only 6 ships left from the original 18, and all of them showed severe battle damage. Against any other enemy, such a small force would have been laughable. But the humans had already proven that normal military logic didn't apply to them. They charged toward the Draknari flagship with the same determination they had shown throughout the battle. Morrison's voice carried across all frequencies as they approached their target. "This is for every human who ever dreamed of living among the stars," he said. "This is for everyone counting on us to keep them safe." The final assault on the Death's Edge was a coordinated ramming attack that destroyed both the Draknari flagship and most of the remaining human ships. Admiral Kathek died when his command center was breached by the Liberty Bell's final charge. With their admiral dead and their flagship destroyed, the surviving Draknari ships lost formation and began to retreat. What had started as a routine conquest had become their worst defeat in centuries. The humans had won through sheer force of will and an unwillingness to surrender. Zix-9 sat in stunned silence as he watched the enemy fleet flee the system. His instruments showed that only 2 human ships had survived the battle, and both were too damaged to pursue the retreating Draknari. By every measure of military science, the humans should have been annihilated. Instead, they had achieved an impossible victory that would be remembered throughout the galaxy. Zix-9 remained motionless in his observation chair for nearly an hour after the battle ended. His recording equipment continued to capture data automatically, but his conscious mind struggled to process what he had witnessed. The debris field around New Haven told a story that contradicted everything he thought he knew about warfare. The tactical display showed the mathematical reality of the battle. The Draknari had possessed superior numbers, better weapons, stronger shields, and more experienced crews. Their victory should have been certain within the first few minutes of combat. Yet somehow the humans had not only survived but had actually forced the enemy to retreat. Zix-9 began reviewing the recorded data, searching for some explanation that would make sense of the impossible outcome. His analytical mind examined every detail of the battle, looking for hidden weapons or secret tactics that might explain the human success. What he found instead was something far more disturbing to his understanding of military science. The humans had won through sacrifice. Every major turning point in the battle had come when individual humans chose to give their lives to damage enemy ships or protect their companions. Lieutenant Carter ramming her fighter into the shield generator, Sergeant Collins overloading his reactor, Captain Rodriguez steering her disabled ship into an enemy cruiser, and Commander Wright attacking the flagship alone. These were not tactical decisions based on military doctrine or strategic planning. They were emotional choices, made by individuals who valued something more than their own survival. Zix-9 had observed many species over his long career, but he had never seen an entire military force fight with such complete disregard for personal safety. His computer systems began analyzing the psychological profiles of the human commanders. Captain Morrison's service record showed that he had been a civilian transport pilot before the war began. Lieutenant Carter had been a mining engineer, Sergeant Collins had worked in cargo handling, and Captain Rodriguez had operated survey equipment on frontier worlds. None of these people were professional warriors. They had been ordinary citizens who volunteered to defend their colony when the Draknari threat became known. Their lack of formal military training should have been a fatal weakness, but instead it seemed to have given them a flexibility that professional soldiers might have lacked. Zix-9 found himself replaying Captain Morrison's final communications, repeatedly. The human commander had spoken to his crews about fighting for their families and protecting their home. These concepts were not unique to humans, but the intensity of their emotional response seemed to be something special. The observer's analytical mind tried to categorize this emotional intensity as a tactical advantage or disadvantage, but the categories didn't seem to fit. The humans had made decisions that were simultaneously brilliant and suicidal. They had sacrificed individual ships to gain small advantages that eventually led to overall victory. As he continued his analysis, Zix-9 began to notice other details that had escaped his attention during the heat of battle. The human ships had continued fighting even when their situation seemed hopeless. Crews had remained at their stations even when their vessels were taking critical damage. No human ship had attempted to surrender or flee from the battle. This behavior was unprecedented in Zix-9's experience. Most species showed strong survival instincts that prevented them from fighting to the death unless they had no other choice. The humans had chosen to fight to the death even when retreat might have been possible. The observer accessed his personal files and began comparing the human battle to the 16 other conflicts he had observed during his career. The differences were striking and troubling. Other species had fought for territory, resources, or political advantage. The humans had fought for something they called home. Zix-9 tried to understand what made the human concept of home different from the territorial instincts he had observed in other species. The data suggested that humans formed emotional attachments to places and people that went beyond simple biological programming. They seemed willing to die not just for their own survival, but for the survival of others. This willingness to sacrifice for others created a tactical unpredictability that made the humans extremely dangerous opponents. Enemy commanders could not accurately predict human behavior because human decisions were based on emotions rather than logical analysis. Admiral Kathek had lost the battle because he had tried to fight an emotional enemy using logical tactics. The implications of this discovery were disturbing to Zix-9's ordered mind. If humans could defeat the Draknari through emotional warfare, what did that mean for other galactic civilizations? The Kethmaran Empire had maintained peace for thousands of years by carefully calculating the costs and benefits of every conflict. Humans seemed to ignore such calculations completely. Zix-9 began drafting his report to the High Council, but found himself unable to find the right words to describe what he had observed. How does one explain courage to a species that has forgotten what it means? How does one describe sacrifice to beings who calculate everything in terms of personal advantage? The standard military analysis forms had no categories for the type of warfare the humans had demonstrated. There were sections for weapons effectiveness, tactical innovation, and strategic planning, but nothing for the willingness to die for abstract concepts like freedom or home. As he worked on his report, Zix-9 found himself questioning assumptions that had guided his entire career. The Galactic Council had maintained order by ensuring that all conflicts were predictable and controllable. Civilizations fought according to established rules, and the stronger side usually won with minimal casualties. The humans had broken all the established rules and had won anyway. They had transformed certain defeat into impossible victory through the application of something that couldn't be measured or predicted. This made them more dangerous than any advanced weapon or military technology. Zix-9 realized that his report would not be the simple tactical assessment that the High Council was expecting. Instead, it would be a warning about a species that could not be understood through conventional analysis. The humans fought with their hearts rather than their minds, and that made them capable of achieving impossible victories. The observer's 3 hearts beat with an unfamiliar rhythm as he contemplated the full implications of his discovery. The humans were not just another primitive species to be catalogued and forgotten. They were something entirely new in galactic history, a people who could win wars through the sheer force of their emotional commitment. For the first time in his long career, Zix-9 found himself questioning whether the Galactic Council's policy of non-interference was wise. The humans had proven that they could defeat supposedly superior enemies through determination and sacrifice. What would happen when they developed better technology to go with their indomitable spirit? The thought of humans with advanced weapons and their current level of determination sent a chill through Zix-9's consciousness. The galaxy had never faced a species that combined emotional warfare with military capability. The results could reshape the balance of power that had maintained peace for millennia. Zix-9 completed his analysis and began the final draft of his report. But as he wrote, he realized that his words would change everything for both the Galactic Council and for humanity itself. The humans had won more than just a single battle. They had won the attention and respect of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. 3 days after the battle, Zix-9 transmitted his completed report to the High Council of Kethmoran. The document was unlike anything he had written in 3 centuries of service. Instead of the usual tactical assessments and strategic recommendations, his report contained warnings and philosophical observations that would disturb the comfortable certainties of galactic civilization. The High Council convened an emergency session to review Zix-9's findings. Chancellor Vexithara read the report aloud to the assembled council members, her ancient voice growing more troubled with each paragraph. The other council members listened in increasingly uncomfortable silence as the implications of the observers' discoveries became clear. The human military force consisted of converted civilian vessels with outdated weapons and minimal armor, the report began. By all conventional measures, they should have been destroyed within minutes of engaging the Draknari fleet. Instead, they achieved total victory through tactics that defy standard military analysis. Lord Kethmore interrupted the reading with obvious disbelief. There must be some error in the data. No primitive species could defeat the Draknari Empire in direct combat. Admiral Kathek has never lost a battle in over 200 years of service. Chancellor Vexithara continued reading. Without comment, the humans demonstrated a willingness to sacrifice individual units to achieve strategic objectives that transcends normal survival instincts. They appear to possess emotional motivations that override logical decision-making processes. This makes their tactical responses unpredictable and extremely dangerous to opponents who rely on conventional military doctrine. The council chamber fell silent as the full meaning of Zix-9's words became apparent. The observer was describing a species that could not be controlled or predicted, using the methods that had maintained galactic peace for millennia. The humans represented something entirely outside the established order. Recommendation: immediate, diplomatic contact should be established with human leadership, the report continued. The humans possess a military capability that cannot be measured in conventional terms. Their emotional commitment to abstract concepts like freedom and home makes them capable of achieving victories that should be impossible, according to established military science. Another council member, Lady Thexvara, spoke up with concern obvious in her voice. If this report is accurate, then the humans represent a threat to the stability of the entire galaxy. A species that ignores logical military doctrine could disrupt the balance of power that we have carefully maintained for thousands of years. The Chancellor resumed reading the most disturbing section of Zix-9's report. The humans do not fight to win in the conventional sense. They fight to ensure that what they value most continues to exist. This fundamental difference in motivation makes them more resilient than any defensive technology and more dangerous than any offensive weapon system. The report went on to describe specific examples of human behavior during the battle. Captain Morrison choosing to go down with his ship to ensure all escape pods launched safely. Lieutenant Carter ramming her fighter into an enemy shield generator. Sergeant Collins manually overloading his reactor to destroy enemy boarding parties. Commander Wright leading a solo attack on the enemy flagship. Each of these actions violated standard military doctrine, the report explained. But collectively, they created a pattern of unpredictable tactical responses that confused and ultimately defeated a superior enemy force. The humans transformed individual acts of sacrifice into strategic advantages that conventional analysis could not anticipate or counter. As the reading continued, several council members began to shift uncomfortably in their floating platforms. The established order of galactic civilization was based on the assumption that all conflicts could be understood and controlled through superior technology and logical analysis. The humans had proven that emotions could override these advantages. The report's conclusion was the most troubling section of all. We ordered observation of humanity's military capabilities, Zix9 had written. Instead, we discovered that humans do not fight to win in the traditional sense. They fight to ensure that what matters most to them survives, regardless of the personal cost. This makes them more dangerous than any weapon, more resilient than any armor, and more valuable than any resource in our galaxy. Chancellor Vexathara set down the report and looked around the council chamber. The other members sat in stunned silence, trying to process the implications of what they had heard. The humans were not just another primitive species to be catalogued and forgotten. They were something that could reshape the entire balance of galactic power. What does Commander Zix9 recommend as our course of action? Lord Kethmore asked finally. He suggests immediate diplomatic contact and offers of alliance, the Chancellor replied. His analysis indicates that the humans will continue to develop their military capabilities, but their emotional motivations will remain constant. He believes they could become either our greatest allies or our most dangerous enemies, depending on how we approach them. Lady Thexvara voiced the concern that all council members were thinking. But if we ally with the humans, how do we control them? Our entire system of government is based on logical analysis and predictable behavior. The humans seem to operate according to completely different principles. The Chancellor stood and moved to the great viewing screen that dominated one wall of the council chamber. The display showed the current political map of the galaxy, with different colors representing the various empires and federations that maintained the established order. Everything was neat, organized, and predictable. Perhaps that is exactly why we need the humans as allies, she said thoughtfully. Our civilization has become comfortable with predictability. We have forgotten that growth and change sometimes require the willingness to take risks that logic would advise against. The discussion continued for hours as council members debated the implications of Zix9's report. Some argued for immediate military action to contain the human threat before it could spread. Others suggested diplomatic isolation to prevent human influence from disrupting other civilizations. But a growing number began to see the potential benefits of alliance with a species that could achieve impossible victories. In the end, the High Council made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. They voted to send Zix9 back to human space, not as an observer, but as the first official ambassador from the Kethmoran Empire to Earth. His mission would be to establish diplomatic relations and offer the humans membership in the galactic community. The decision was not unanimous, and many council members remained concerned about the unpredictable nature of human emotions. But the majority recognized that the humans had already proven they could not be ignored or dismissed as primitive. The choice was between attempting to understand them or risking eventual conflict with a species that had shown they could win battles they should lose. Zix9 received his new assignment with mixed emotions that he was only beginning to understand. His 3 centuries of clinical observation had not prepared him for the complex feelings that came with actually caring about the species he studied. The humans had shown him that some things were worth fighting for, even when the odds of victory were impossible. His personal log entry that night contained words that would have been unthinkable before his encounter with human warfare. "I have observed the death of stars and the birth of civilizations," he wrote. "I have seen empires rise and fall like waves upon cosmic shores, but never have I seen a people transform certain defeat into glorious victory through pure force of heart. I was ordered to watch humans in battle. Now I carry regret, not for what I witnessed, but for what my people might lose by failing to understand it. The humans have taught me that there are things worth dying for, and perhaps more, importantly, things worth living for. Tomorrow I return to Earth not as an observer, but as someone who hopes to learn what it truly means to fight for home. The galaxy would never be the same. The humans had won their most important victory without even knowing it. They had earned the respect and alliance of the most advanced civilizations in known space. And somewhere in the debris field around New Haven, the spirit of sacrifice that had made victory possible continued to burn like a beacon, calling other species to remember what they had forgotten about the true meaning of courage.